Independent Women's Forum senior fellow Gayle Trotter, Wall Street Journal U.S. Editor Glenn Hall, Great America Alliance co-chair Eric Beach. So, Eric, begin with you. What if it just ekes out right at the end of the year? We get it. It isn't all that it was originally touted to be. They might have to make adjustments on the corporate rate, staggered over some years, whatever, but they get it. They do it. What do you think?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think it's, again, a referendum on, the Senate leadership to get something done. We have the governing majority in the House and the Senate. And I think what you're going to see is, much like the health care debate, if there are obvious parts into cutting the corporate tax, for example, in cutting the corporate tax, for example, that we can at least all agree on. So why does it have to be an all or nothing kind of deal? And the Senate needs to act. They're under the microscope. The approval ratings of Congress is an all-time low. And I think as we're seeing, the economy at an all-time high, or at least the market at an all-time high, every time I come on this show, there's, record growth, right? And so
well, keep coming on, because you're right. Every time you are on, it keeps going. So keep that up. I'm the lucky charm. So I think the president continues to lead. But again, what we need is to, bypass the rhetoric and start putting out at least some of the things that we can all agree on, like cutting the corporate tax to, I hope, 15%. Glenn, you could make that argument when they were trying to repeal and replace Obamacare, that they had to do that, and they inevitably and invariably failed, not once but twice. So now, the same pitch I'm hearing for this, where the sense of urgency, I would imagine, is greater, the recognition that coming up with something is vital, but something just gnaws at me thinking that, all they need is, 3 senators and all bets are off. What do you think?
That's right, and that's the best case scenario, right? Because they're using the budget reconciliation process, which means they don't have to get to the 60 votes, right? So they don't have a lot of wiggle room in there. And, I think the pressure is still on, Neil. They have got to show that, having control means they can govern and they can deliver on the promises. And that's something the president has obsessed about, and he needs to get Congress to bring him a legislative victory going into these midterms.
So, Gayle, obviously you've been watching the markets, and, maybe they've been building in this, this tax cut, that it's going to happen. Other people tell me, no, it's really just improved earnings, great balance sheets, companies that are really lean and mean and continuing to roll. But I can't imagine, Gayle, that if these tax cuts don't materialize, they wouldn't lose a little bit of that luster. What do you think?
Right. Well, I advise a lot of small businesses, and they're already making forecasts based on getting this corporate tax rate reduction. And we're talking about the politics of it right now. But if we really focus on the policy, we had a study released by the Council of Economic Advisors earlier on Monday talking about how this type of tax reform, if the Congress is able to come together and pass it into law, will lead to $4,000 to $9,000 annually into the pockets of hardworking Americans. And that is something that needs to be stressed in order to get the politicians to get behind it and actually pass it into a law and allow this administration to sign it.
I want you guys to react to something. This is John McCain at this big event yesterday, where he clearly was taking a shot at the present occupant of the Oval Office. Then we're going to discuss this.
To fear the world we have organized and led the 3/4 of a century, to abandon the ideals we have advanced around the globe, to refuse the obligations of international leadership and our duty to remain the last best hope of Earth, for the sake of some half-baked, spurious nationalism cooked up by people who would rather find scapegoats than solve problems.
Half-baked. He wasn't saying that of the President of the United States, Eric, was he?
Who knows? What I know is that there's been a deterrent inside of Washington, D.C., since really November 8th, since Donald Trump was elected. But really, look at the markets. They're following these type of nationalistic policies. I can promise you one thing. If Donald Trump was not president of the United States, we would not be talking about, cutting the corporate taxes, for example. We would not be talking about, repatriating some of the money from overseas. We wouldn't be talking about any of that. We wouldn't talk about illegal immigration.
Well, what I'm talking about is I'm listening to that, Eric. I'm listening to John McCain, for my great respect. But he's a no vote for sure. And it's not even just the antipathy toward the president, but the fact that he has been against tax cuts, the Bush tax cuts, the first and the second, if memory serves me right, Glenn Hall. And now I'm wondering, since this is built on shakier arithmetic, that is what
McCain has already said, then those, he looks like a no. What do you think?
I think John McCain is very busy right now worrying about his own legacy, and he's trying to establish himself as the one who's speaking the truth out there. But I think it's too early to read into this. It's going to depend on what kind of deal they all work out in the Senate, and whether or not it's something that he can be on board with. I wouldn't rule him out just yet.
Okay. So, Gayle, you could say that he might have telegraphed, that is Senator McCain, that he's open to changing his views, because when President Obama wanted to raise those taxes again, particularly on the upper income, he was a no vote on that, arguing that that was not a time to be raising taxes on anyone, even though he was against the prior cuts that afforded them. So he does seem to indicate some flexibility there. But in your thinking, let's say he's a no. Rand Paul could be dicey. Susan Collins is iffy. I mean, you have a number of Republican senators who aren't sure bets, so he would have to pick up some Democratic support. Could he? Would he?
Yes, if you look back at some of the things that Democrats have said in the past, including Chuck Schumer, there was bipartisan agreement that our corporate tax rate was making us globally non-competitive. So certainly Schumer's not going to vote for this. But if you look at senators who are up for re-election, like Joe Manchin, who come from states that supported Trump in the presidential election.
Yeah, but Manchin has said he doesn't like what he sees right now. Now, I don't know what allowances or provisions they'll make for him, but he would be a no for the time being.
Right, and that would be the art of the deal, because you can see what was put out as this unifying framework. It has a lot of play in the joints. There's flexibility, so we don't have the exact numbers yet.
All right. I want to thank you all. We're monitoring this very, very closely.